Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And with this one, I wanted to do a 9.1.5 tier list for what I think is looking really fun and awesome moving into this next patch prior to 9.2. And I will be only covering the melee DPS. I have a video on ranged already completed, and I'm going to be mostly looking at kind of what's going to be unlocking for these specializations in 9.1.5, what's really kind of got my eye on them, what's got my attention in terms of like fun and awesomeness, trying to take into account the class's baseline as a whole, because I think that's where this type of tier list can get a little bit confusing, is whether or not I'm talking about the class as fun as its own, or whether I'm not talking about the changes moving forward could be fun to check out. And that might be where the distinct difference is lost a little bit with this tier list. So I'm going to include the baseline along with the changes when I rank these classes on how fun I think they're going to be. So fun is going to include depth. So this for me is like, how long do I think I can play it before I get bored? The other thing is kind of versatility, flexibility, how many different builds, what different types of play styles are available to it, because that's important for me. For fun is to have a lot of different options to explore and to have kind of a high ceiling to push in terms of skill. So that's going to kind of be the baseline for this tier list here. And the first specialization is the Arms Warrior. And I think no doubt that this is kind of the shining star of Shadowlands in terms of specializations, with the abilities having returned to it since the start of the expansion. It seems like their covenants have been getting a little bit more attention than some of the other ones for specializations. This is a spec that you can play that has access to all 4 covenants. They are all amazing. They're all super fun. They all have a super unique identity to them. You really can't go wrong with it in terms of its flexibility and versatility. For PvE now, with the AoE damage uncapping, Arms Warrior has a good opportunity to really stand up as well in terms of its damage output overall in PvE, because it was lacking in the AoE department. Maybe now it's going to be a bit stronger. It's getting buffs to some of its conduits to buff its AoE in PvE as well. So you really can't go wrong with this. Like, they've just... Like, this was the cream of the crop spec before 9.1.5, but now in 9.1.5, being able to flex between the different covenants, AoE uncapping, it's amazing in PvP. Like, you're not going to go wrong picking the Arms Warrior. I can't wait to try out different covenants on mine personally. I've been having a blast on it. It's actually been what's been getting me through this kind of down period for Shadowlands at the moment, is just exploring it. Now, being able to actually switch covenants is going to be really awesome for it. Assassination Rogue, to me, this one is just a little bit too straightforward. It's a very simple kidney shot vendetta, one shot the target. If it doesn't die, you're not really going to be doing too much. It doesn't have very much flexibility or versatility. I haven't seen a huge amount of builds available to it. There are changes coming in for the Night Fae Covenant and the Night Fae specific legendary, so that Sepsis now will grant you benefits of the other rogue specialization, so that after Vendetta, or after Sepsis ends, you're going to gain access to Shadow Blades from something like the Subtlety rogue. So you'll be getting these other cooldowns, which might be cool to check out, but I'm not sold on it really being super spectacular. And that's why for me, Assassination is probably still just going to stick with Necrolord, kind of just be this do damage rotation, don't die spec. Doesn't have a lot of flexibility to peel enemy attackers like Arms Warrior has. It's just a very straightforward attacker, do damage, don't die type of spec. Which doesn't really let me expand a lot. I haven't seen a lot of the other covenants kind of grabbing me just yet in terms of trying them out. Maybe there's potential there that we're going to have to stay alert for, but at the moment, it's really not grabbing my attention. I'd put it at about a B tier at the moment, maybe a C tier. This list is actually going to be really tough for me to make, because I think a lot of stuff is actually really fun. So maybe because it's not really scoring super high in all those other aspects, I've got to give it a lower ranking so that we can get relative to the other ones. But for myself, Assassination is probably the most boring spec of all the rogue specs. At the moment, while it's powerful and it's potent, it's definitely competitively viable. Probably a good pickup if you're a new player to Rogue, but you may want to graduate beyond it at some point, which then I guess you could, with the other specs available. But if you were just going to stick to that spec, I think that I would get bored of it personally pretty fast. Enhancement Shaman. The spec is more versatile than the Assassination Rogue, with the ability to heal, disrupt enemy spellcasters more so. But it's so pigeonholed right now into all of its damage coming from the Doomwinds legendary or the Frostwitch legendary at the moment, that its damage output is very predictable and can then become very frustrating. You've only got these one hit moments, and if you're not getting them, then you're feeling pretty useless. You're just basically a substitute healer. I think it's got more depth than the Assassination Rogue because you do need to be aware of your teammates more so. So if you want that hybrid gameplay, it's going to fill that role, but I'm not sure that it's going to give you a super high ceiling. You do need to be very aware of your positioning at all times, enemy cooldown utility like disarms and stuns to try and time your damage if you want to play around that mechanically in PvP. But it's just not really going to be stretching super far for me. I think it's coming about into the middle of the pack at the moment. And it doesn't have the flexibility of covenants either. Pretty much every enhancement shaman, well, not pretty much, I think every enhancement shaman is playing Venthyr, and I haven't seen any of the other ones really standing out to kind of grab me to think that Enhance is going to have other options. The only thing could possibly be Kyrian for Shaman, where they're buffing the conduit towards the totem's damage. In PvE, this might be amazing, but in PvP, the totem is probably going to die. Maybe we see some stuff with it again. Got to stay alert, got to follow all these specs because you never know. But at the moment, it's not grabbing me. It's probably just, it's a good spec, solid spec, but I don't like the limited burst windows where you're kind of just waiting for the next chance and hoping that you don't get stopped on it. Feral Druid, on the other hand, you're not going to have that problem. You're going to be pumping out damage all the time. You're going to be pumping out healing all the time. You're going to flex between you going for crowd control, moving around the map, having massive control. It's a very fun specialization in my mind. Much more depth to it than the Enhancement Shaman. The ability to just shapeshift into other forms and try to pick your moment when you need to be defensive and offensive is going to be great. But maybe you do like some limitations, so Enhance might be a little bit more favoring to you. But Feral Druid for sure is a spec that I don't think you're going to get bored of. At the moment, it seems like the only covenant really that we've not seen Feral Druid too much is Venthyr. But Convoke the Spirits is super awesome, super fun. It's going to be amazing to be able to just switch between them when you want. Like maybe you want to do a couple Battlegrounds, Feral Druid, one-shot people as Convoke or some 2v2, but then you want to start pushing some ratings. So you want to go to Necrolord to get more sustain. You can play Kyrian. It's kind of just more basic, just another cooldown to activate that enhances the damage of you and your partner. Doesn't stand out to me as much as Convoke the Spirits or the Necrolord's Adaptive Swarm, timing with your bleeds and stuff like that. But you do have flexibility and versatility, so it stands out to me. Maybe we should put it on A tier because Warrior's got 4 covenants. Maybe that's like the drawing line. I think Feral should be up there. It's definitely a spec that you're going to have fun for a long time. Going to be more complex again, not the most beginner friendly. But once you've got it figured out, you're definitely going to have a good time with it for a long time. Frost Death Knight, very similar to the Enhancement Shaman. It's limited in what you're going to be able to do. These big burst windows, like if you want to set up these massive crits and you just want to see those numbers and melt people during your cooldowns, it's going to be a great spec to pick up. Chains of Ice is a super awesome, unique utility to Death Knight class to be able to chains of ice targets and snare them and prevent them from moving. But at the moment, it seems like, at least in PvP, Necrolord is really the only Covenant option. Haven't kept up to date exactly with PvE for their Covenant options, but I would, if I had to guess, it's probably either Night Fae or Venthyr, whichever one's doing the most AoE damage. That's just kind of how it usually pans out for the Covenants in PvE, is whichever one can hit the most monsters for the most amount of damage. The Enhanced Death and Decay from Night Fae, not really appealing to me. The extra dot from the Kyrian, again, not really that appealing in terms of uniqueness when we compare them to like Necrolord Warbanner and this Night Fae Shockwave irradiating out. Like Necrolord's ability is amazing for Death Knight, right? It's a really cool Covenant ability, but you're not going to really have any other ways to move beyond that. So for me, I think that it's a spec that you'll probably get bored with after a certain period of time, and especially when you figure out when the enemies are going to be able to stop your burst and you're just not able to get past those blockades. That's where you're going to hit your ceiling. You want something casual, fun, big crits. It's getting buffed in PvP. Maybe it will step up a level. You're looking for more kind of just a basic beginner level PvP. Then I think Frost DK is going to be a good pick. It's still good in some 3v3 comps like Warrior Death Knight. I see it quite a lot. But in terms of fun, I think it's going to fall a little bit short. Fury Warrior, to me, it's kind of the basic version of Arms, which is really weird because they're actually kind of very similar in terms of what the utility was returned to them. But not having access to defensive stance means that you don't have the stance dancing. And I think that that is a big deal. Choosing when you want to be on the defense, choosing when you want to be into the offense. I think that unique element for Arms definitely brings it up to a different level. Fury also, I don't see it really being that flexible with Covenants, unlike Arms. A lot of the times I'm seeing Fury Warriors just running cheese Night Fae builds. Sometimes with Death Wish, just trying to get this massive crit shockwave and one-shot people, which seems to be where it's fitting. So it can be viable because of that. It is getting buffs to its auto attack damage, potentially to help it out in PvE. It's only about a 4% overall damage increase, though. I'm not sure if that's enough to kind of push it over the top competitively. But in terms of fun, I think it's going to fall a little bit short. Again, it's a really good feels-good spec, much like Frosty K or Assassination Rogue. But then it starts to fall a bit short. For me, so it's coming in at a little bit of a lower ranking. Doesn't have the flexibility of the Covenants as well. Havoc Demon Hunter. This is another one where you're pretty much stuck to one Covenant, at least in PvP, with running the Night Fae for the hunt. And then in PvE, I would have to imagine it's something to do with AoE damage, whether or not it's the Venthyr dot application. I'm not sure what a lot of the Demon Hunters are currently running at the moment, but I haven't seen anything changing too much that makes me think in PvP at least that Havoc Demon Hunter is going to be going anywhere but Night Fae still. You almost can't kill a target without using the hunt. So yeah, about that. You're going to get buffed on one of your conduits, so you're going to have a little bit of extra damage during your blade dance, which is going to be nice. That's going to feel pretty cool. I really like the aesthetic and the vibe again of Havoc Demon Hunter, using the eye beams, the way it looks, the way it feels, but you're limited in terms of what you can do, at least output wise. In terms of your utility, you have a lot of stuns, but you're often having to use those to kill the target. But it's probably a spec that you're going to get bored of. I'm super excited to try it personally, just because I want to press the hunt. I want to see what it's like to feel like a Dragon Ball Z superhero and just fly through the air like Ultra Instinct. I think I might get bored of it eventually, but initially it's going to be pretty fun. So like, while I'm about to give this one a little bit of a lower ranking in terms of the long term, you do have a lot of like defensive utility, team utility with darkness and blur and trying to time these cooldowns and trade them with other ones. But I think it's probably going to end up being a little bit more middle of the pack. I think it's above these other options because of the team utility and having to be aware of your partners, and then flipping your stuns and your crowd control between defense and offense makes it a little bit more complex than this row. So it's coming in at B tier. Along with Enhancement Shaman. And I personally really excited to try the hunt, but I could see why it would fall short otherwise. Outlaw Rogue, actually a really fun spec. Trying to roll the right dice, trying to get the right buff and go for the kill. It's a spec that's just not been able to deliver on damage at the moment, comparatively to that of Assassination. Perhaps it comes back. Curse of the Dreadblades is getting buffed. There's some conduit changes to Rogue as well. And Rogue seems to be kind of this mystery one as to what's going to be the best Covenant, right? Like for Outlaw Rogue, has anyone figured out what the best Covenant is? Seems like in PvE, they're a bit reluctant to make it any good because of how much it dominated in Battle for Azeroth Mythic Plus. Almost makes me think they're purposely not buffing it or uncapping its AoE in a similar fashion to the other specs, because they don't want Outlaw to suddenly take over the scene again, so you're kind of restricted in that sense. But for PvP, it seems like it's so close to just being a competitive spec. I think that it is a very fun spec. I've only seen it sparingly in twos, but when you compare it to Assassination's damage output, sustain over time, it just doesn't compete. When you compare it to Subtlety Rogue's ability to lock down an entire enemy team by itself, it just can't really compete. It's really only working with that lower cooldown blind, which just hasn't been enough to make it competitive, but I do think it is a fun spec. So if at any point this buff to Curse of the Dreadblades, or maybe some other buffs in the future, bumps it up a couple of notches, I do think that it is a spec worth checking out. Maybe it's because it doesn't have the big heals like the Word of Glories from a Ret Paladin. Speaking of Red's up next, but it doesn't have those big heals or saves, so it relies on its teammates to keep it alive for recovery. And at the moment, if you're doing that, you're going to be inferior to the specs that can sustain themselves. That's probably what I think is holding it back. But it's definitely a fun spec worth checking out. Ret Paladin, much like Enhancement Shaman, just kind of bouncing between healing teammates and trying to get that one-shot zap moment during cooldowns. You get that one zap more frequently with Seraphim and the ability to activate your wings through honor talents, through the Reckoning honor talent. So you get that window more often. You'll see less frustration as a result. And then you also have Covenant abilities like Divine Toll, which absolutely cracks somebody open. And you're going to have more flexibility because Necrolord Paladin is getting buffed by a lot. It might even take over. Night Fae Summer Blessing is getting buffed as well. And I've seen a Rex Troy video already of that. That looks pretty scary. Haven't seen any PvP, at least, Venthyr Ret Paladins dropping the Ashen Hollow, but you do have more flexibility and more builds to kind of expand to, in my mind, on the Retribution Paladin, which I think puts it ahead of the Enhancement Shaman, but the gameplay will feel pretty similar. but you'll have the immunities to rely on, unlike the enhancement, and have more mobility with the freedom and the steed. Now, Subtlety, this is a spec that I think is very fun at the moment. You have complete control of the fight. There's always these you might have these scripted moments where you're trying to do these 3-2-1 goes to lock down the enemy team, but lining up all your cooldowns perfectly every time, trying to take that shot at the Death Star and KO somebody, definitely makes this spec a lot of fun. It's one that I really, really do want to play. I seem to just not ever find the time to get it going. But if you want something flashy, you want something where you're making like all the moves and you're the one that's setting up the whole team, you're gonna love this spec. For me, I think it's tough to put it between A and S. I almost wish that I had an in between. Maybe we could just shove everything down a notch. I think right now maybe A borderlining into S. Again, I think the reason maybe it doesn't go into S is because at the highest competitive level, your setups are going to feel predictable. Once you've strategized them out, your flexibility is going to be lost. But once you're executing on those strats, you're going to feel a lot of momentum in the plays you're able to make. Survival Hunter, super underrated spec at the moment. You need to know what you're doing if you play this spec. It is not going to play itself, but it is a very fun spec to play with all the different unique kind of Batman toolkit that it's got with bear traps and nets and harpooning around the map. It plays like no other spec in the game. But if you mess up on this thing, you don't know what you're doing, you are going to have a rough ride. But regardless of that, and again, competitively, it doesn't really keep up with BM's damage output at the moment. You can definitely push high rating with it. It's a spec you need to know what you're doing with, so don't mess around with it, but it's definitely a fun one. Unholy Death Knight. This is another spec that I really want to try and get my hands on at some point. It's getting some pretty big buffs now, actually, for PvP specifically. Again, limited because I'm really only seeing the Necrolord Death Knights. I'm curious to see if any Death Knight players try anything else. I have to level this one at some point. Especially now with the Comp Stomp Brawl coming out. It's going to be a nice honor farm to catch up some characters. It's a spec that I really, really want to check out. Again, maybe because it's kicked my butt a bunch of times. If you watched my recent videos, you would have seen. I think it falls a little bit short of the S tier, only because, again, it's Covenant flexibility. But the ability to just kind of change to defense, use Chains of Ice, move away from your opponents, then set up for your massive cooldown burst, summon all these ghouls. This is very unique flavor with how its dots work. It's a unique experience. I hope that eventually is going to get to shine at some point in Shadowlands. Like we're in the land of the dead. I think we need a patch, one patch at least, right? With Unholy getting its comeback. Again, it is getting some PvP buffs, so maybe it will. Windwalker Monk. This is a spec again, picking between defense and offense, trying to go all in for your kill. You'll have the enhancement paladin 5 in terms of getting your burst damage, but then you have talents that are going to give you procs on your spinning crane kick, which will give you damage outside of your normal cooldown window, which will make it feel like you're always able to make something happen as a result. But it is getting nerfed slightly. With Bone Dust Brew being nerfed in PvP, and then that Mark of the Crane getting nerfed as well for its spinning crane kick damage. Still probably going to be very terrifying. We really only seen Necrolord with it with Bone Dust Brew, but at those nerfs, maybe Kyrion's more competitive. Night Fae Covenant is also getting buffed with the Phaline Stomp Conduit, but I don't know how much they would have had to have buffed it for everyone to even remember that Night Fae was an option for Windwalker. Ventir's also getting some pretty huge buffs. For Monk, I do wonder if the Weapons of Order, summoning all these different clones and just having this army of things running at people would be any good. I think for myself personally, this is a spec that's going to provide you a long distance of fun. One that you will pick and be able to play for a long time. Super competitive in PvE at the moment. If not maybe the best DPS, maybe the one best DPS, just the game as a whole. But it is also a very fun spec that will last you a long time. Maybe not as forgiving, again, at least defensively in PvP as some other options like Arms Warrior or Rep Paladin, but you will definitely not get bored with this spec. Other than that, I hope that you enjoyed the video. We've got our rankings here. If you like the video, leave it a thumbs up. Your comments down below. I want this, again, to be a resource for everybody so they can make the right choice for their class moving forward into 9.1.5. And let's hope it's a good one. I'm really hoping that it's a good one with a lot of these iterations on systems that we really wanted to see at the start of the expansion finally coming to fruition. And then hopefully we see a lot of this community response that we're getting now continued and prolonged into the future as well. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one.